Hello, how's it going? I'm Sarah, the Skeptical Witch. Thank you so very much for joining me on my channel today. This is a place where I like to talk about all things to do with skeptical witchcraft, the psychology of magic, and religious studies as well. In today's video, I want to focus specifically on tarot cards and oracle cards and reading tarot in a manner that is not for divination. So kind of separating tarot from the kind of predicting the future elements that it's usually associated with. So really here, I just want to explore how we can use tarot cards as skeptics, as people who maybe don't necessarily believe that the cards can predict the future or have any necessary mystical elements to them, but instead how we can use them in a more practical kind of sense. And even though tarot cards are primarily associated with divination, they don't have to be. And there are a multitude of ways that we can use tarot cards that go beyond that kind of divination aspect. Tarot cards and oracle cards can be used in both spiritual and secular contexts, and they can be used in many ways that are super beneficial to us, including psychological exploration and kind of doing that inner work. So that's what I want to explore here, how I approach tarot and some other ways that we can think about approaching tarot as skeptics, as secular witches, or whatever we may be. So tarot can be a really great tool for psychological exploration, for getting to know ourselves on deeper, more intimate, more unconscious levels. And it's often used by spiritual counselors and therapists in working with their clients in order to help them understand what's going on beneath the surface as well. Interestingly, we're also seeing tarot kind of emerging in more mainstream psychotherapy practices now as well, which is really cool. And a really interesting book on the topic is Tarot and Psychology: Spectrums of Possibility by Dr. Arthur Rosengarten. This book is about how tarot can be used in mainstream psychotherapy in a variety of different ways, and how various different styles of psychotherapy and different styles of using tarot can work together. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend checking out this book. And it's something that I am currently reading, so I will be referring to that a little bit throughout this video as well. So Dr. Rosengarten talks about in this book how instead of asking the tarot why things happen, or what caused certain things to happen, or what the kind of future outcomes will be, we can use tarot to reflect on various events in our lives, various aspects of our psyche, and to really ask, what do the cards reveal about this? What can we do to kind of think deeper about these things? He talks about how the empowered randomness of the tarot can open the doors of perception to a plethora of possibilities for our own kind of potential, and opening up the potential of the mind and the potential of exploring our own minds in a much deeper sense. When tarot is removed from a mystical or divination kind of context, it becomes a tool for tapping into the unconscious mind, and it can be a very powerful tool for that. So in this kind of context, this like psychological context, pulling tarot cards is random. There is no kind of divine being guiding what we're pulling. There is no, it's not about like the universe speaking through us in any way. It's really just about us pulling random cards. But that doesn't mean that these cards have to be meaningless. Quite the contrary, actually. These random cards can actually be quite meaningful if we interpret them as such. The symbols and symbolic meanings on the cards are universal enough that we can almost always apply them to some aspect of our lives. They can almost always fit into our kind of narratives of our personal journeys or our mental states in some way. Rosengarten notes that pulling tarot cards is the luck of the draw, but also that life itself is largely about the luck of the draw. It's how we respond to things that matter, and tarot can really help us to find the best way forward in certain situations. Rosengarten also writes that tarot cards either clarify, interconnect, or amplify what already exists in consciousness, or else they bring unconscious possibilities into conscious awareness. Sometimes when we're doing a reading, we'll find that the perfect tarot card seems to come up that explains our situation exactly, or confirms something that we're already thinking. And this is a kind of confirmation bias when this does happen. We tend to kind of remember these instances where the perfect card comes up, where it seems to perfectly fit into things. And it can also help us confirm that this is actually how we feel about something, and if it's positive, then maybe it is something that we should move forward with. So it can provide us that confirmation bias, but in a helpful way if we're willing to see it like that. Conversely, sometimes the tarot cards that we'll pull in a reading will actually challenge our preconceived ideas about something, or challenge how we think we feel about something. So for example, if you are doing a tarot spread related to whether you should stay with your job or not, and let's say you feel perfectly content in your job, or you think that you're perfectly content with your job, but then you pull the card of death, which often represents letting go of things or kind of moving on. It represents a phase in one's life needing to die in order to kind of move on from that. So this might make you then reconsider how you actually feel about your position, about your career or your working role. And it may lead to finding out that maybe you don't actually feel super content with it. Maybe that's something that you're just telling yourself, and maybe you feel like you've actually been really stagnant in this position and it might be time to move on. So it can challenge our surface thoughts about things and get kind of into the deeper matter of things. Beyond just the set meanings of the cards, tarot can also be a really helpful tool for getting deeper into our minds because of the symbolism and imagery that the cards often have. So each unique deck will often have various different symbols, a lot of different imagery. Kind of the art is often very unique, and these are kind of like layers of symbols within symbols, and there is the meaning of the cards that's kind of generalized in one sense, and then there can also be what you get out of the card in particular because of that symbolism on the other hand as well. And these things can work in tandem with one another, or you can sometimes even just look at the symbolism and imagery on its own and see how that speaks to you as well. So Rosengarten notes that one method that can be especially helpful, particularly for people who are unfamiliar with the cards' meanings, is to lay them all out face up and then select the ones that really speak to you. And this can be in terms of kind of answering a question or just thinking about something in general, whatever you want to do with that. Just pick the cards that speak to you the most. The visual aspects of the cards, the symbolism, can trigger certain emotions, certain memories, maybe memories that are buried kind of deep within your unconscious mind. It can bring those to the surface. And then without even necessarily having to look up the meanings of the cards, you can just sit with that and kind of ruminate on that and think about why these cards make you think of certain things or why they trigger certain emotions within you. And working through that in and of itself can be a really helpful psychological exercise. Tarot cards can also be really helpful when doing shadow work. So shadow work comes from the Jungian concept of the shadow, which is basically the parts of ourselves that we keep hidden. So the parts of ourselves that are associated with negative traits, usually, that we deny as being parts of who we are. So things like jealousy, fear, anger, all those things we might push into the shadows and pretend that they aren't actually a part of ourselves. And this can cause a lot of problems because it can lead to kind of like a fractured sense of self, and also sometimes we act because of these parts of ourselves, or we have certain thoughts that are associated with these shadowy parts of ourselves, and we don't necessarily know why, because we haven't really integrated this shadow into our complete sense of self. So shadow work is very much about identifying, addressing the shadow, and working towards becoming whole, not by ignoring the shadow, but instead by making peace with it and really accepting that this is a part of who we are. And if we want to move towards being more positive or move towards living our lives better, then we have to accept the shadow and work with it. So tarot cards may be really helpful in our processes of doing this shadow work because they might bring up certain emotions, certain thoughts that are difficult for us to face otherwise. They may kind of force us to face our shadow in a way. So like if we get a particular card in a reading and it makes us feel very uncomfortable, then doing shadow work around that might be sitting with that and thinking about, why does this make me uncomfortable? Where is that coming from? And it might be coming from these more shadowy aspects of ourselves. So it can be helpful in that sense. When I do my shadow work or kind of inner exploration, I typically do it through journaling as well. And tarot cards I find can make for really interesting journaling prompts, partially because they bring up a lot of emotions. They have these kind of deep symbolic qualities to them that can spark our imaginations and can help us understand ourselves better. They can help us create narratives around how we're feeling, around what's going on in our lives, and they can help kind of structure our thoughts. So they can be helpful for doing that journaling work. For me, journaling and writing is really how I think. Like I think through writing. It's how I make sense of the jumbled mess that is my mind. So when I'm doing tarot readings, I typically will journal about them and what that kind of means for me. Another way that I use tarot as a skeptic is for decision making. So not for decision making in like any predictive or kind of divination kind of sense, but rather for understanding how I feel about particular decisions. So this is very similar to like tossing a coin, say. And when you toss a coin and it lands one way or the other, and it will kind of give you this gut reaction feeling about how you actually feel about that decision, how you feel about that outcome. I think that tarot can be used in a very similar way. You can ask your deck a question about something that you have to make a decision about, and then based on your initial gut reaction to the card that you pull, you may have your answer about what you want to do, because I think sometimes it's hard to logically make sense of what it is that we want to do. Like I'm a very indecisive person, so I have a lot of trouble making really any decisions, no matter how big or small. So I find that using this method and seeing how I actually feel about things, like on a kind of gut level, helps me to make those decisions in the end. You can use like a regular deck for it, of course, but I also like using those like online yes/no tarot simulators for just like random everyday decisions that I have to make that I'm having trouble with. It's just, I don't know, it gives you kind of like a plain, clear answer, yes or no. And it's just fun. And I think that it can be helpful as long as we don't put like too much stock in that. I've mentioned this in another video as well, but sometimes I also use tarot for creativity and for helping me out with various projects like papers that I'm writing or something like that. If I'm feeling stuck with it, sometimes I will just pull a tarot card and it might inspire me in a way. It might provoke some new kind of creative thoughts for me and just open up new ways of thinking about whatever project or problem I'm stuck on. You might also want to pull a card at the beginning of every day or every week to help you with a mindfulness practice or to be mindful of certain things. So like, for example, if you pull a tarot card that has to do with relationships, that might help you be more mindful of your interpersonal relationships throughout the day or week. Or if you pull a card that has to do with anger, it might help you be more mindful of when you are becoming unnecessarily angry, and it might help you kind of check yourself in those situations if you have this card on your mind, if it's something that you're thinking about. So it can help you to pay more attention to certain aspects of your life. You can also use tarot cards to help you with goal setting. So this is something that I like to do kind of on a monthly and yearly basis. I like to use tarot cards to set my goals for that kind of particular period of time. So for example, I am using the Temperance card for my kind of year card because it has to do with balance and harmony and kind of synthesis of things and ideas. And that's something that I'm really interested in focusing on at this point in my life. And then my monthly card is Four of Swords because I really need to focus more on kind of rest and relaxation and restoring and rejuvenating myself after a really intense semester. So this month I'm kind of trying to focus on taking it easy a little bit. So that's my monthly card. And you can do these like randomly. You can pull random cards for what you want to focus on, or you can intentionally choose specific cards based on what it is you actually want to achieve. And then the card hopefully will help you to visualize that goal better, or to focus on it in like kind of a different way, I guess. It's a different way of like articulating what your goals are, and a different way of keeping them in mind. So even though personally I don't really use tarot cards for divination necessarily, I tend to use them more for inner work and psychological exploration, I'm still not like entirely secular when it comes to tarot cards. Like, tarot cards for me are inherently spiritual. They are a part of my spiritual practice, and that is largely because for me that psychological work is spiritual. That is part of what it means for me to be a spiritual being, is doing that work. So tarot cards for me are not entirely secular, and I do bring in some more kind of mystical elements into my work with tarot. And one of the ways that this happens for me is through synchronicity and like synchronistic experiences while using tarot. So I did a video on synchronicities not too long ago, where I kind of talked about how synchronicities are kind of a Jungian concept that has to do with meaningful coincidences. So even though I know that the cards that I pull in any given reading are going to be random, that still doesn't negate the meaning that they can have, or this kind of synchronicity that they can evoke. And I think that these like synchronistic moments that we can have with tarot connects to Rosengarten's idea of empowered randomness, in the way that they connect us to meaning in a way that goes beyond our own individual egos. They can make us feel like we are a part of something greater, a part of something beyond ourselves, like we are part of kind of a whole. And sometimes through tarot readings, if we let them, they can seem to make order within chaos. They can seem to create meaning out of randomness. Our synchronistic experiences with tarot cards can be really powerful. Like if you're doing a tarot reading and you get that kind of perfect card at the perfect moment, and things feel like they're all clicking into place and everything seems to be aligning, even if you know that it's entirely random, that can still be really meaningful for you if you decide to let it. I told this story on my blog post that I did about tarot cards, but when I was deciding whether or not to move abroad to Scotland for a year to study and kind of leave my home in Canada behind, leave my family and friends behind, I was doing like tarot card readings around that to kind of help me figure out how I felt about that. And when I was shuffling the cards, the 8 of Wands fell out, and I just kind of like put it back in, shuffled, picked a card, and it was the 8 of Wands. And then later, the next day, I went to like a group meditation thing, and we were pulling tarot cards, and I pulled the 8 of Wands. So it was a very kind of like synchronistic experience for me, and things really seemed to be aligning, especially because the 8 of Wands has to do with travel. It has to do with like fast movement and change, and it especially has to do with like air travel sometimes. So that for me was just like it kind of like solidified this idea for me that like moving to Scotland would be a good idea. So it was kind of like then and there at that group meditation that I decided that I would go, and that I decided I would kind of leave everything behind and have this incredible experience. And it's still one of the best things that I've ever done. So having that experience, it made me feel really good about it. It made me like help me make that decision. And it was a really, really like powerful spiritual experience for me as well. Like I still remember that as being incredibly important, and yeah, just like a kind of monumental event in my life, as weird as that may sound. So I don't believe in gods or destiny or anything like that. I don't believe that the universe is like actually speaking to me through the cards, but I do sometimes like to imagine that that is the case. I do sometimes like to suspend my disbelief when I'm working with tarot in order to get that sense of like deeper meaning, in order to feel like it is part of kind of some greater plan, part of kind of the greater interconnected fabric of the universe, you know? I think that for me, it makes the experiences feel even more spiritually meaningful and powerful. And obviously this isn't going to be the case for everyone, especially people who use tarot from like a strictly secular perspective. And that's totally fine. Like, you do you, whatever works for you, right? Like, whatever it is that you get out of tarot, that is fantastic. And that if that is like using it for divination or using it for like practical, mundane, everyday decisions, like that's cool. That's fantastic. And I think that we can do this because tarot is such a versatile tool and it can speak to us on so many different levels. It can be helpful in so many different aspects and areas of our lives, and that's something that I really appreciate about it and something that I really love about it. So, and then finally, the last way that kind of tarot plays a role in my life as a skeptic is just telling me that it is going to be okay sometimes. So sometimes, especially when I'm in like a really low place, when I'm feeling really depressed or down, I just want to be told that like everything's going to be okay. You know, sometimes I'm not ready to do that inner work. I'm not ready to do that shadow work yet. I'm not ready to really dive deep into whatever the issue is. Sometimes I just need some like consolation and positivity. So for that, I will go onto YouTube and I will search like tarot readings, usually by like astrological sign. I'll go find like tarot readings for Scorpio. And there are quite a few tarot readers on YouTube who are like way too positive. Like, they will never say anything negative, really. Even if you have like the Tower card coming up like 3 times in a reading, they'll be like, oh, it's all fine. It's sunshine and happiness and rainbows, and they won't really get into anything deep about it. And obviously, if you're looking for like a legitimate reading, these are annoying and kind of ridiculous. But sometimes when I need that like just positivity, I go for that. And sometimes I'll just put those on just to help me feel better about things, even if I know it's ridiculous and even if I don't believe any of it. Sometimes it just helps to like hear these things. I don't know. So that's just one other way that I use tarot sometimes. Oh, and then also sometimes I will listen to like these YouTube tarot readings as I'm falling asleep as a form of like ASMR. I don't know if that's weird or not, but like I personally hate like whispering ASMRs or anything to do with like human bodily noises. Like, those freak me out. I hate them. But when it comes to like card shuffling noises, I love that. Like, that's such a ASMR sensation for me. So sometimes I'll just like listen to tarot readings on YouTube for that. I don't know, like, am I crazy? I don't know. I mean, is that is that weird? Does anyone else feel this way? Has anyone else like used tarot readings or card shuffling for ASMR? I would love to hear from you in the comments and make me feel a little less weird about that. But I would also love to hear from you about any other ways that you use tarot in your life, especially from like a skeptical, secular, atheist, witch position, if that's you. And thank you so much for watching this video. I will end it